It's always quite awkward to start this. So welcome everyone. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. I can see only Katerina. I'm not sure why I should be seeing you. Let's see gallery view, for example. Okay.
Can you see me?
I think we're all here. Okay, wonderful. Great. Let me just get my notes. Okay, so let's start. This webinar was supposed to be in March in this year in Milan, and we were very much hoping to do a training with our Italian members in Italy. But as you know, well, due to the health crisis, as you could imagine, everything is online, and we still wanted to do it. Can you all hear me? Because I see people that are saying that they can't hear. You can just go like this. Okay. So my name is Maria Aldanas, and I am policy officer at FEANTSA. Some of you already know me. I am policy officer in charge of everything to do with human rights and housing rights, and I am coordinator of Housing Rights Watch. This training was mainly meant for our FEANTSA Italian members, so the content that you will see responds to their needs. I would like to also thank Caterina Cortese of FIOPS and Julia for organizing this event with us. We hope that the limitation of this online format, especially in relation to the interaction and exchanges, will not reduce the quality of the event. This is a pretty new format for us all, so bear with us. And also, although the webinar is in English, a large majority of the people that are here with us today are non-English speakers. So I would like to ask everyone to try to speak slowly and clearly so that we can all be understood. As a matter of fact, the big majority of the participants that have registered are Italian. So that was our main goal. So in this respect, we are happy. So all the speakers have a PowerPoint presentation to allow to better follow the presentations, and they will be shared also with the video on the Housing Rights Watch website. I think you've probably already received the link, but I can share it with you once again in the chat part so that you will be able to follow. Well, my presentation has changed a bit, and I think also some of the learning outcomes that we had included have changed a bit because we thought that it was too short to include so many things. So some of the things will change. I think Max, for example, was telling me that the other day. And just for you to know, the webinar is divided in two different parts. So I will be speaking about European international avenues to defend housing rights, and it will be followed by Max Giglin, who will be speaking about well, a first approach to the concept of rent control and the example of Berlin. And there's another part, the second part of the webinar, which will be a bit of a state of play of housing exclusion and homelessness in Italy, and the avenues to defend the right to housing in Italy, with a panel of experts that will be introduced by Caterina and Julia later on. So before further ado, I'm going to take the floor and start speaking about the European. Okay, so let me share the screen. Make sure that I share the screen because most of the time I fail to do that. I think I'm now sharing my screen. Okay, so this is the program of the day. So I will be speaking for about 15 minutes. Max Giglin following me another 15 minutes, 20 minutes. We will then have some time for questions, and I will ask you to include them in the chat section instead of the Q&A sections. It's better for us to collect them, so that you can all see what questions have been asked. So then at around 11, we are probably late already, well, maybe not. We will start with a panel with our Italian experts. And then we will end with a Q&A sections at the end of the webinar. Okay, so I prepared this some time ago, and I have changed. I have done some changes to adapt it to the Italian context, but I normally have like a kind of a standard template to explain what the avenues are. We have recently launched a document which is instruments for advocacy and litigation in Europe. You can see that in our website, but I will share it with you in the chat in a minute. And so a lot of the information that is contained in this document can also be found in this tool, which is quite simple. And our idea was to bring the housing rights instruments to you all in a simple language and not so much legal. So putting together resources that were scattered somewhere. So one of the first things that I would like to speak about is the human rights-based approach, the human rights-based approach to homelessness. So FEANTSA considers homelessness as a situation that deprives individuals of human rights, including the right to housing. This is a concept that comes from the cooperation of development. And we have been working with this human rights-based approach in FEANTSA for some time now, not from the beginning of the existence of FEANTSA, but there used to be a housing rights expert group in which, let's say, all these issues were studied. And right now we have something we call Housing Rights Watch Network. It is a joint venture between FEANTSA and Fondation Abbé Pierre, a French foundation. Our main goals are promoting housing rights in Europe. So everything to do with disseminating knowledge about housing rights, monitoring case law, supporting strategic litigation, especially collective complaints, which is something that FEANTSA has known for a while. And also, why not, and so important to develop links with human rights organizations at a large scale, at the global level, and also European. So lastly, and I would like to highlight this, we also try to raise awareness about and fight criminalization of homelessness in Europe. And what is this thing of the right-based approach to housing? So the thing is, for many years, FEANTSA has been a service provider organization. So it is very important that the individuals that we help in all these services are given emergency and other services. But we have moved away from the charity approach and moved away from the needs approach to a more right-based approach, considering individuals and groups that are empowered to claim their rights. So seeing that let me just check this, that homeless people are right holders, so they are individuals who are entitled to assistance. And we would focus also more than in the appearance of problems and the causes of problems, we would focus more on the structural causes and their appearances. So let's say that homeless people are right holders and governments are duty bearers. So let's say that governments have obligations to fulfill the housing rights of individuals. And this is what I'm going to talk about in the next slides, in the next 15 minutes, more or less. First of all, before I start speaking about advocacy and strategic litigation on housing rights, I would like to mention that FEANTSA uses our ethos categorization, so a European typology of homelessness and housing exclusion, and we have a broad concept of homelessness. We're not only referring to people that are sleeping rough or that are living in a shelter, but also speaking about all those people that are living in insecure housing, and so they're threatened with housing exclusion, and also living in inadequate housing, so in unfit housing or overcrowded housing and things like that. So just for you to know that when I speak about homelessness, I am most of the time speaking about something larger. So as I've said, like most of our members in FEANTSA, but more and more our service providers, but more and more the kind of profile of our members is different. Is some of our members are doing more and more advocacy on housing rights. So the idea that an individual or a group can influence the decisions within political, economic, and social system and institutions. So move forward and progress in terms of housing rights. And that can include many activities. So people do advocacy using media campaigns, public speaking, commissioning public research, meeting with MEPs, with MPs in your parliament, trying to shape the new laws that are happening. And for us, advocacy on housing rights means speaking up for homeless people, as a broad concept that I mentioned, and acting on their behalf to defend the right to be housed, and obviously other related rights. A key element in this will be the participation of homeless people in driving their own needs and rights. And one of the tools that we use is a strategic litigation. So what I have to say is that the situation in terms of housing rights is so complex and so difficult that we believe that we need to use as many tools as possible to try to change the situation. So raising awareness and training, advocacy and litigation, and even the activist struggle, so more kind of direct action that some tenant organizations are doing, it's needed to try to change things. But we, for example, as FEANTSA we do lobby at EU level to change things. And I think all these avenues are complementary and are needed in achieving the goal of changing the reality. So strategic litigation for us is to use legal action to single out cases, bring them to court or to quasi-judicial bodies in order to achieve a specific goal. And what we are trying to achieve is a positive, broader impact on the law and the policy most of the time. So it's not only about the individual case, but a larger impact. So the right to housing may not always be explicitly recognized. So sometimes our litigation would be, for example, in relation to, let's say, prohibition of inhuman and degrading treatment, for example, but that is connected, for example, with the situation of homelessness of certain vulnerable groups. And we use a lot this corpus of case law jurisprudence that has gradually defined the minimum standards related to the right to housing in Europe. And what I'm going to explain right now is what are the institutional overview and some of the legal conventions, the international and European conventions where the right to housing is enshrined, the right to housing and other rights, and how we can use them as NGOs to progress on housing rights. So first of all, well, this is like the first kind of slide. So we're going to be speaking a bit about the UN system, the Council of Europe system, and lastly, the EU system, but very, very quickly. So in the UN system, what interests us more is the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. In this covenant, where we can find Article 11, in Article 11, it says that the state parties, so states, recognize the right of everyone to an adequate standard of living for himself and his family, including adequate food, clothing, and housing. So this is like the basis of the kind of legal work that we can do, Article 11, which is the relevant one in this area. And in the UN system, there's a committee on economic, social, and cultural rights. It's a body of 18 independent experts that oversees how the different European countries, or European international member states, implement the rights included in the covenant that I mentioned before, and specifically the social rights like the right to an adequate standard of living and the right to housing. So what they do, they issue general comments, so interpretations on how we can, so what's the content of the right to housing, for example. And about that, they have issued two different comments, the general comment number 4 and general comment number 7. First one is about the elements of adequate housing, and then another general comment, which is about forced evictions. Just to mention these elements of the adequate housing, like I see very often people speaking about the right to housing, and sometimes people mean like the right to a person to have a house. Okay, but when we speak about the right to housing, we speak about much more than just that. We're speaking about the progressive realization of a right. And when we speak about the right to housing, we speak about legal security of tenure. We speak about making available services, materials, and facilities. We speak about affordability. I think many times, and I think, for example, my colleague Max will speak a bit about this. We speak about affordability. So if a house is not affordable, so it's a violation of right to housing. Anyway. Another element is habitability, accessibility, location, and cultural adequacy. I don't want to say a lot more about this, just for you to understand what are these elements. So the next step will be is how Italy, how does Italy places as a country in relation to this? Well, Italy has signed and ratified the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. You can see here at the top, you can see the International Covenant. So this covenant is interpreted with general comments by the Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. This committee also monitors how Italy is doing in terms of housing rights, and it can issue reports with concluding observations. So speaking about how Italy is fulfilling the right to housing of citizens. There's another part, which is the optional protocol to the International Covenant on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights that allows to introduce complaints in case of violation of rights in Italy. So that's interesting because we will see that actually Italy has signed this optional protocol. So individuals or groups, NGOs, can go to the committee to actually present claims, and also NGOs can, so state parties, they submit country reports periodically, and NGOs can submit shadow reports, okay, to try to complement the state party reports. Okay, so that's something that also Italy can do, or Italian NGOs can do. This slide is just to say that Spain is probably the country that has mostly used this this kind of individual protocol, and that Spain has been found in violation of the right to housing at least these 3 times, but I think there's a 4th one which happened this year that is not in the slide. But this is about the UN. But also then we have these 2 other systems, the Council of Europe and European Union. I wanted to introduce these slides first, and I only have 5 minutes to finish my presentation. It's going to be quite quick. But the idea is for you to understand that the Council of Europe, it's gone. It's something completely different from the European Union. Some people sometimes confuse it because there's the same kind of little stars and the blue colors, and okay. So the Council of Europe, it's formed by 47 countries, if I'm not mistaken. It's larger than the idea of European Union. European Union is the 27 members. I'm already speaking about not including UK. And if you go to the Council of Europe, you will find European Convention of Human Rights and the European Social Charter. And in the European Union, you have the Court of Justice of the EU with their own case law. Well, because of time, I'm going to have to be quickly on this, but just for you to understand that these are 2 different things. So about the Council of Europe, I would like to say a bit about the European Social Charter. So Article 31, with a view to ensuring the effective exercise of the right to housing, the parties undertake to take measures to promote access to housing of an adequate standard, to prevent and reduce homelessness with a view to its gradual elimination, to make the price of housing accessible to those with adequate resources. So here again, you see some of the elements that I mentioned in the UN system. So in the European Social Charter, Article 31 is probably the article that it's more important, more relevant for us. The European Committee of Social Rights is like the other committee that I mentioned, but in the Council of Europe, is a body of independent experts that oversee the state parties in implementation of the Social Charter. They also issue statements of interpretation, authoritative interpretation of the Social Charter provisions, similar to the general comments that I mentioned. And they also do the same kind of reporting, and there's thematic reporting every year. This year, for example, was on the rights of children and families, and the right to housing was included. So the conclusions appeared in February. And more importantly for us, they also can judge the conformity in law and practice with the provision of the European Social Charter. And FEANTSA, as some other social partners and NGOs, have participatory status to actually lodge a complaint against the state. And so how does Italy do on this? Well, Italy has signed the additional protocol that allows to lodge collective complaints, and NGOs can also send comments to the European Committee once the reports of the Italian government is public. NGOs can send comments to have a say on what's being said by the country. You may have heard of the collective complaint FEANTSA versus France, which was probably one of the biggest collective complaints that we've done in the past in FEANTSA. But also, apart from this, which was found 6 violation of the right to housing by France in all these different areas. Collective complaints have been used in Italy in the past. For example, it's very important, the collective complaint, the Center on Housing Rights and Evictions versus Italy, which was a key step in the evolution of the collective complaints jurisprudence. It's jurisprudence on housing rights and Roma rights most of the time. There's also the European Roma Rights Center versus Italy, which found the Italian government in violation of Article 31. Roma camping sites were insufficient and inadequate, and a violation of Article 31(2). So eviction procedures of Roma were not adequate, and Roma were victims of unjustified violence during such evictions. And lastly, I would like to speak a bit about the European Union and the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. Just to say that there's a kind of a right to housing also in the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. The only thing is that the Charter of Fundamental Rights applies to the EU institutions and its member states in the implementation of EU law. So, for example, I would like to mention Article 34 of the Charter, 34.3, it doesn't say here, that recognizes and respects the right to social and housing assistance. The Article 34 has been included in the Pillar of Social Rights in the Principle 19. The only thing is the European Pillar of Social Rights is a non-binding instrument. It is only a policy tool. And one of the activities that we do, our lobby activities in relation to the European Pillar of Social Rights, is try to include some kind of monitoring of the progress on the right to housing, and maybe using the European semester to do that, and the social scoreboard that is included together with that. And I think because of time, I'm going to try and be very, very good on this. I'm going to leave my colleague Max to speak about that. But let's just say that most of the housing-related binding obligations that are included in all these systems are, so obligations are for states, because these are international or European conventions, but that also regional and local governments are bound by all these obligations. And I think Max is probably going to speak about the local governments more than I'm going to speak. I hope that was interesting and not too complicated. I hope that you're still there. And I would like to now give the floor to my colleague, Max Giggling. He's, let me just get my notes. He is a PhD in social psychology, and he is a consultant in applied housing research. I got to know him, well, via the social media, as in many other cases. And he was working, or has been working, for the city of Barcelona, the observatory, the local observatory. You will tell us a bit about that, I guess, Max. And he's going to be speaking about rent control as a tool for cities to secure affordable housing in the private rental market, and the case of Berlin. Well, Max, this is you have the floor.
Okay. I first try to share the presentation. I hope you can see the presentation.
Yes, Max.
Wonderful.
Perfect.
Okay. So, indeed, I'm still working with the Observatory of Barcelona, and I started to work with them exactly about rent control 4 years ago. So very, very happy to have been invited by you to participate in this seminar, and to speak about rent control and security of tenants, which I think are extremely related. In fact, In Barcelona 4 years ago, they asked me to talk about rent control, and I finally spoke mostly about security of tenants. This is why. This is because I lived most of my life in countries where security of tenants is a long-term right, a normal right. And when I came to Spain about 15 years ago, I found myself in a different setting where security of tenants in the renting sector was limited to 5 years. I tried to find out how's the situation in Italy, and if I'm well informed, it's a little bit the same situation as in Spain. If it did not change, I think you have 4-year contracts renewable one time for another 4 years. So just to give you an idea of how I perceive this difference, it is as if you live in a country where it's normal then that labor rights include contracts with open-ended contracts in the most of the time, no? And then you come to a country where suddenly you would have a labor contract which finishes after 3 years or 5 years, and every 3 or 5 years you have to renegotiate with your enterprise, with your firm. You have to renegotiate your labor contract as if you never worked there. So rent control is an important thing, an important topic in Germany, in France, or in Spain. But since the security of tenants isn't the same, the context is so different that it is as if they would speak about different things. Sorry for this long introduction, but it's I think very important, because I went to see that it's hard to speak about German rights in Spain if you don't give this context, because it's not the same context. Okay. I will speak first about some aspects of rent regulation, security of tenure, subsidies, dysfunctional markets, and then the affordability. And then in the second part, I will present shortly some aspects of the rent regulation in Berlin. First of all, rent regulation is a natural consequence of security of tenure for the long term. If you have very long-term or open-ended contracts, during the contract, there is no market force that could decide the rent increase. So there's a necessity of a rent regulation who assures that the rent can increase during the contract, with two risks. If the rent increases are too high, in fact, even if you have long-term contracts, security of tenure is not guaranteed. I mean, in this case, the landlord, for example, can just increase the rent enough to make the tenant leave. On the other hand, if rent increases are insufficient, on the long term, renting property will not be profitable anymore. And that means that the rental housing provision in the private sector becomes impossible. This is something which happened in Spain with a rent regulation who made rental property absolutely not profitable, and it became a big problem for housing provision on the private sector. So rent regulation is a necessary component of any sustainable form of long-term security of tenure. The example is in Germany, the introduction of an open-ended protection in 1971, open-ended protection of security of tenure. The laws about security of tenure and the rent control was introduced as part of this law, not to protect tenants, then as a kind of compromise between interests of tenants and interests of landlords. This regulation is working now for about 50 years, so it's quite a stable regulation, I think. Rent regulation is also a prerequisite for rental subsidies. There are some studies in France trying to tie rental subsidies to rent increases, and they show the risk even in the long term, and even in the context. France also has a long-term security of tenure. Even in the context of long-term security of tenure, there's a risk that housing subsidies partially go into become benefits of the owners because they finance high rents or rent increases. So in a context where there's no rent control on the long term and no security of tenure, the risk that rental subsidies end up to be subsidies to the owners and not to the tenants are extremely high. Rent regulation is also a mechanism of market regulation in dysfunctional markets. The simple fact that housing is an essential good limits the household's capacity to adjust the demand to the offer. So we are not in the usual free market functioning. Most households just need housing. They have no other solution and they have to pay. So here you heard surely that as well Berlin as Barcelona, tenants are complaining about skyrocketing rents, but skyrocketing rents are not, the sky is not the same in Berlin as in Barcelona. Here you see the median rent in 2018 in Berlin was a little less than 7 euros per square meter, and in Barcelona it was 12 euros per square meter. And of course, wages are not higher in Barcelona than they are in Berlin. This is thanks to the rent control existing in Berlin. And I'm not speaking about the rent control introduced recently, but the German rent control system, which forces rents to increase much slower than in a setting where free market forces are have much more impact on rents, like in Barcelona. In Berlin, the background is that the federal rent, the background for the new regulation they introduced in Berlin, and which I will mention in the now. The background is that existing federal rent proved insufficient to stop rent increase. In fact, the German system works quite well if there are market variations on the short and medium term. But what we have since the housing boom of the first decade of the 2000s is a gradual increase in housing prices and rents, despite of the housing crash, in fact. So this very, very long cycle of rising rents makes the German system proved insufficient. From the federal government, there were introduced several additional mechanisms to stop this tendency, which proved insufficient. So the Berlin regional government, and here it's important to state that Berlin is a region as well as a city, so they have competences of region in this case. They introduced a new rent regulation locally. Main aspects of the regional rent control put in place in Berlin. The regulation is limited to 5 years. It's a regulation which intends to tackle rising prices. Recent dwellings are excluded from the regulation. This is done, of course, so that there is no limitation of the interest to build. The main aspects of the regulations are a rent freeze. The rents cannot be increased until 22, and from then on the rents can be increased a maximum of 1.3%. There's also a maximum rent limited to the medium level of rent of 2013, which is a time when in Berlin the rents still were kind of, there was still a market equilibrium. So 2013 plus wage evolution. This is the maximum rent allowed. And a third very important point of this regulation is the possibility, it limits the rent increases for modernization. Since in Germany, with open-ended contracts and limited possibilities to increase rents, landlords used modernization as a means to increase rents or even to get rid of the tenants. It is important to state that the Berlin rent regulation exists at the same time than the federal regulation, which means the federal regulation, which is German federal regulation, still applies in Berlin too. This is because the regulation of private contracts is a federal competence, and rent regulation falls under this competence. But housing in Germany, as well as in Spain, I don't know in Italy, is a regional competence. So 2 years ago, there was an article published that suggested that regional government with the competence in housing might have the ability to a public law regulation of rental prices, opposed to the civil law regulation of rental contracts. The Berlin law is exploring exactly this possibility, to have a public law regulation as well as a civil law regulation of rental of rents. It's an absolutely unknown legal territory, so nobody knows if it will be constitutional or not. The decision is expected for 2021, and it's of course a very important decision, since there are already other cities like Munich or Hamburg or Stuttgart who might try to use the same mechanism if it's considered constitutional. Berlin used two mechanisms to limit rent in its rent regulation: rent freeze and reference rent. The German system normally is based in maximum prices as defined by a reference rent. So you can, if you have a rent which is below the maximum rent, you can increase it up to this maximum rent level. Now in Berlin, they introduced also a rent freeze, which is not to limit rent with a reference rent, but in reference to the rent of the same dwelling paid before. So these are two very important mechanisms which differ, for example, which differ between France and Germany, for example. German system is maximum prices. French system is limited rent increases. The rent freeze, or a limitation of rent in increments, is much easier to establish in a market setting, because the rental price is supposed to be a market price. If you limit its increment, you do the same thing for all rents, for all market prices. On the other hand, establish a maximum price is more difficult, since you have to create a price which is limiting rents, but more or less the same, which means that no owner has its rights to create benefits limited more than another owner. This is a big problem. I think in Germany there were already lawsuits about maximum prices not considered just. So in Berlin, they started with a rent freeze, and later they introduced common maximum prices. And I finish with this quick comparison between Berlin, Paris, and Barcelona, talking about the same topic of the kind of limit. In France, as I said, security of tenure is also protected indefinitely. In France, open-ended contracts are not allowed, I think, like in Italy. I read that in Italy it's limited to 30 years or something like that. In France, it's the same problem. So what they did, they introduced a mandatory contract renewal every time the contract or its renewal finishes. So the effect is exactly the same than open-ended contracts. The rent control system in France limits rent increases with respect to previous rent. So the increase is limited. This led to very high prices, mostly in Berlin and in Paris. And they introduced an additional exceptional measure applied in, it's a federal law, but it applies mostly in Paris. They introduced a limited rent increase with respect to reference rent, similar to the German system. In Barcelona, the federal rent regulation assures the security of tenure and the rent control to a limited duration. It was 3 years until last year, the contract duration, and now it's 5 or 7 years depending on the type of landlord. So security of tenure and rent control is limited to this time. After this time, as I said in my introduction, in Spain, it's as if the tenant never lived in this house. He has to renegotiate a new rent. This led to very high increases. As I showed you before, in Barcelona, rents are quite higher than in Berlin. And therefore, Barcelona or Catalonia introduced a system of rent control, also on the regional level, and with the same question as in Berlin. It has to be seen if it's constitutional that the region tries to introduce a rent regulation. But there's another big difference. The rent regulation in Berlin and Barcelona is introduced without security, a long-term security tenure, and without another long-term rent control system as in Berlin. As I said, in Berlin, if it's declared unconstitutional, the federal system is still in place, which controls rent increases. In Barcelona, they introduced a relatively strict system of rent control, but there's nothing else. I'm not sure that this is what I would recommend, since even if the German system proved insufficient to limit high rent increases, it still works. It still limits the problem of inaccessible housing, for the unaffordable housing for the tenants.
Hi,
So,
Max, sorry,
yes.
I'm going to have to interrupt you.
Yes, sorry.
I think we've gone over the time already.
Sorry, yes.
No, that's okay. I think I haven't seen any questions on these topics in the chat, unless they have included them in the. No, I don't think anything. But there's a comment here. Very interesting indeed. Think we should try to lobby more on this issue in Italy. It's a key matter for housing rights, also for homeless people living shelters. Laura Collini has a question. Laura, would you like to speak up? I can probably allow you to speak if you want. Can you just wait for a moment? I'm allowed to talk. Laura, I think you can actually talk now. Would you like to speak up?
Thank you. No, I was not quick enough to write the question, so because I was very concentrated in excellent, absolutely excellent presentations, both of you. So thank you very much. I was wondering more if you could expand on the concept of reference rents and how it's designed in the different systems, because it's in Germany, if I understand well, is the Mietspiegel, and in France and Spain, and what would be for Italy?
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
As I said, the rent control in Germany was introduced as a means to be a compromise solution between the interests of landlords and tenants. So that what they proposed is the initial rent is free, but you can't increase this initial rent unless it's lower than the medium rent paid for similar dwellings in the same region. So if the regional, for example, in a situation like actually, no, where rent prices for dwellings, for new contracts went very high, were skyrocketing. The existing rents do not increase at the same level. So if the existing rent level, medium level is here, and you sign a new contract, you can't increase this initial rent until the medium rent in existing contracts went higher than this rent, which means in the actual context that often a rent can't be increased in the 10 first years of a contract, for example. So, but in other moments, of course, where which happened, no, there were moments where it was just the reverse. The medium rent, the Mietspiegel price, was higher than new contracts because there was another market situation. So therefore, it's a system which is balancing the market forces, but it's still a market price. What they did in Berlin is try to get the prices lower than these medium rent. They went back to 2013 to have still a market reference and fixed this as the medium reference price. The last thing I wanted to mention is that medium prices in Germany, but also in France, take into account the localization of the house, of the dwelling, but also several aspects of the dwelling itself. So a dwelling in a new building or in an old building won't have the same reference price. This is, I think, an important aspect for what I said before, to make the reference price respect the, I think, also obligation to be just, you know, with homeowners, just not in the moral sense, but in the constitutional sense, so that they have the same right to benefit, which can be a problem to make unconstitutional the reference
Max,
price if it's not respected.
I have a last question, and maybe we can, after that, we can continue with the second part of our webinar. I would like to ask, for example, I think in the Italian Constitution, as in the Spanish Constitution, for example, they're all liberal constitutions. So the right to property is like sacred. Mm-hmm. But they both of them, they include like the social function of property. So mm-hmm. I think one of the more interesting for me debates nowadays is how we can limit this sacred right to property, and if we can, so a landlord will be allowed to have some reasonable benefit, but not to the extent that he wants. Like, I think that's one of the debates that I think is more interesting, you know, like the balance between the right to property and the social function of property. And I think after that, maybe if you have an opinion on that, maybe we can go on and to the second part of the webinar, so that we're not late. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, it could be even simpler in the German right. Inspired from the Roman right, there's also a limitation of interest rate. No, for lending money or whatsoever. You can't lend money with an interest rate of 20 or 30%. It would be, I don't know how you say this in English, usual. Well, it would be considered unmoral, no, to ask so high an interest rate if you ask this high interest rate because the other party has no choice but to accept this high interest rate. So this, which is not explicitly, as I know, in the Spanish law, but also applicable in the Spanish law system, I think, is also used in Germany to limit the rents, because rents are also something you pay like interest rates for a service, and you can't ask too high benefit a rent because of this limited right to make benefits on the if the other person is in a situation of need, which is the case nowadays. No, it's hard to find a dwelling. People have to accept very high rents because they have no other choice. And in Germany, it's even a criminal offense if the rent is higher than 50% over the usual rent. Okay.
I think both in Spanish and in Italian would say that is usura, because it goes really
Exacto.
beyond.
It's usura. Exactly.
It's the same thing in Italian, usura. So I think our anyway, just to end up, I mean, I don't think we have more time for questions, but I think our Italian participants would be very pleased to see if you could do some study about an Italian city, Milan or Rome. And they have a sort of rent regulation, they say, it's called equo canone. This is the first time I hear about that, but apparently, according to Caterina, is very weak. And equo canone, according to Paolo, it's stopped in 1998. So now there's a voluntary frame for owners and tenants, but it's pretty weak because it's lack of real and strong incentive. Anyway, so thank you very much, Max, for your excellent and really inspiring presentation. I hope that all of our Italian audience, all of them, found it as interesting as I did. Maybe we can move on now with our Italian panelists, and you can stay with us if you want, Max, or if you have other things.
Of course, and thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Max. So, Caterina Cortese.
Yes.
Are you there?
Yes.
So.
Okay. I am here. Okay.
Okay. So maybe you can introduce yourself.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Maria.
And explain people what you've been doing.
Yes, introduce myself. My name is Caterina Cortese. Thank you very much, Max, for your inspiring presentation for us. And okay, my name is Caterina Cortese. I work in FEOPS. I'm social and policy officer in FEOPS, and it is a very pleasure to be able to organize this webinar with Maria and FEANTSA and Housing Rights Watch. And a few words about FEOPS, because FEOPS is Italian full member of FEANTSA, and we have a historical cooperation with Housing Rights Watch. And recently we have written, under the supervision of Maria, the document of housing right and overview that you can find in the website of FEOPS and Housing Rights Watch. And we have cooperated with the members called Avvocato di Strada. And okay, FEOPS is an umbrella organization and represent more than 100 members and association working with homeless people. And FEOPS carry out advocacy action and also analysis and research activities on the main topics as well housing rights and housing exclusion. And for this reason, today is very important for us to looking for European overview. So thanks, Maria. It's very interesting for us to understand, to better understand what is the complaint method and possible cooperation between Italian and European organism. And today for us is important because we can observe the housing right from 2 points of view, because we have looked the protection of the tenants, and it is very important to when the state and the federal government or regional governments guarantees the affordable housing, and it is a very crucial topic in Italy. And today, in the second side of the webinar, we can observe like the prevention of eviction is very important also in Italy. And okay, but I don't take any more time and leave the floor to the panelists that I say thanks so much to the panelists. And the first panelist is my pleasure to present him, is Paolo Pezzana. He is very famous in a European context, and Paolo was former president in FEOPS. When I started to work in FEOPS, we have a pleasure to meet, and today is a senior trainer. And thanks to Paolo, because Paolo presents an overview of the political and normative and social framework of housing exclusion and homelessness in Italy. Okay, that's good. For you, Paolo? Yes, are you ready with the presentation?
Yes, I am.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Caterina. Thank you, Maria. Thank you to Max for his interesting presentation. My overview this morning is a very general overview, more with the aim to give you suggestion to go in deep in this theme than for giving you informations, because probably most of you there are in the panelists and in the audience of this meeting people with strong competencies in this field. So I think I don't add anything to their knowledge about housing rights in Italy, but I want to try to strengthen some elements for giving you suggestion for together find way to make lobby, talking to the public institutions to this extent, and so on. So my first suggestion is in the title, and my title is motivated from Netflix and the famous series La Casa de Papel. In English it sounds Money Heights, nothing to do with papel or paper or carta in Italian, but for us it's very, very meaningful, because I think housing right in Italy is a paper right. So a kind of right you can strengthen on the paper, you can talk about it, but very, very difficult to implement and to make effective in the reality of the life of people. So I'm not a professor, I'm not a professor, just a consultant, but I will try to see together with you these 5 points. Some fact figures about housing stock, households and homelessness in Italy by now, how the right to housing in low-end cards is considered in Italy, even if many things are already being said by Maria, and the panelists who follow me surely will go in deep in this argument, so I'll go very fast on it. Something about evictions and homeless prevention in Italy, my opinion and my point of view on housing policies and the lack of housing policies in Italy, and some recommendation, even if I'm not the committee, but I think the UN committee, but I think we can try to stress some recommendation for going this field. So let's start from some facts and figures. The housing market in Italy is mainly an owner-occupied market. So more than 70% of the houses are occupied by their owner. This data, this figure in the past was higher, and it's also the product of some housing policies we had in the past, in far past, from 1930 to 1960, where many social houses were provided by the government to the people, with the possibility for the people to buy these houses after the period. By this way, many of the Italian owners, or Italian in that moment, have the property of their houses. This fact was very strong. Was a very strong cultural lever in the Italian context, even at political level, to think that we don't have a real housing problem, because all the Italian people, or better, the majority of Italian people, own their house. So policies for social housing are not so necessary. As you know, politician, I've been one, I've been mayor of my city for several years in the past. Many politicians think that the priorities come from their idea of the opinions of the people when go to vote. And if 75, 80%, as it was in the recent past, of people own their house, they probably don't feel the necessity to social housing policies. And so probably for this is one of the reasons that make these kind of policies not so common and not so strong in our country. There's a medium market for rental in around 15%, and a small market for social rented houses, just 3.7% of the whole stock of housing in Italy. Some other form from private social housing, gratuitous loan, occupation, and so on, had a not irrelevant part in the stock with 96%. 57% of Italian tenure is owner, without they have handing their mortgage and loans and so on. 14% are owner with mortgage or loan, 20% tenant at market price in the rental market, and just 9% tenant with reduced price, reduced free, or scheme of rental control. The social housing sector is mainly public. There are around 1,790,000 dwellings in this sector, owned by 74 local agencies that operate mainly at regional level, in some cases at local level or municipality level, but the main frame is regional in that sense, with specific agencies. Just 644,000 dwellings of this stock are available. It means that 18.5% of the stock of social houses, public owned in Italy, are not usable, are empty or not affordable or occupied, and not in the social housing market. 88.8% are rented on an average of 110 euros per month. 11.2% are empty or illegally occupied. All these, not all, the majority of these dwellings are very old. 71.3% are built before 1981. 1.4 million of people living there, and around 20% of them is living without paying rent since 12 months or more. So it's a sort of enclave in which many people staying when they have a big economical problem, if they had the possibility to access this market, and in which the eviction processes are slower than in other sectors. In the private sector, there are some interesting local private experience social houses or new models of living, new model of housing, but there are no official data, figure, facts, and collections available for this world. So I can't say anything precise in that sense, but I personally know several very interesting experience about the new model of housings that are ongoing in Italy, both in northern and southern Italy. So this is an example that Italian fantasy many times applied to a sector where social policies didn't give efficient effort, try to find other solutions. Maybe in the future, this solution will find more room and space. In a nutshell, I can say that in the Italian culture, even in the political culture, house is a property. The rental market is not so affordable, even if there are areas of this market with the special condition in which affordability is higher. Lot of houses are empty, both owned or in the public, but both houses are empty. There are surely more empty houses than people without an house or looking for an house, for an affordable house. Social housing is residual and for poor, for the lowest decile of the distribution of population. Homelessness is increasing and doesn't match housing market dynamics, if not negatively. So there are people exiting from housing market that become homeless, but there is not a strategy in the evolution of the market to provide some affordable housing to homeless, to really provide house for homeless. We think a lot about accommodation of homeless, but we don't think to the house when we think really in our municipalities to how to accommodate homeless people. And there are huge inequalities and territorial differences among different parts of the country. I don't think a lot about the rights because I know that other panelists will go in deep in this fact, just that there is not an express right to house in Italian constitution. Constitutionalists saying, and also many cards, that we can find something like a right to house, combining among themselves some articles, 2, 3, and 47, the one about social function of property, Maria mentioned it before, but is not a strong frame, because we have to interpret it and we have to balance within this frame the real consistencies of the right. So it's up to court. It's not up to everybody, and it's not up to all the institutions. It's up to court in balancing rights in special cases to try to strengthen this right. By now, we can't consider a fundamental right in Italy, the right to housing, because of lack of provision in the constitution and lack of implementation in the social policy frame. You can claim this right, of course, but you have to claim it at political level, because if you go in a court, you are not sure about the definition of your case. Even if jurisprudence has elaborated some strong position, and we hope they will consolidate on many cases in the future, but not many people use courts in this sense. So when we think to right to housing, homeless, and eviction, we can find that eviction processes in Italy has a trend, a different trend. In 2009, we had far more less eviction than in 2018, but it depends from a legal stop to eviction that government give for coping with increasing social diseases and increasing inequalities and crisis, economic crisis. And now we are still in a similar situation because with COVID crisis, all eviction have been stopped, and probably they will stop until first month of 2021, and then we'll see when this legal stop will end. Probably we will see in this trend an up tendencies. Italy doesn't collect data on eviction where there are no official and registered contracts available. So we have no figures about forced eviction, about occupies, and about the black rental market. Some estimates that the black rental market is at 15–20% of the whole stock. I can't say if this figure is real because I've not official data, but personal experience and my observation of some dynamics in big cities in Italy helped me to say that we are not so far from this figure. Probably among panelists or audience, there are people that have more precise insight about it, and I ask them to share with me and with us their knowledge about it if necessary. There's a relevant gap between eviction sentences and eviction execution. In a year, less than 25% of sentences are executed, regarding to the number of sentences pronounced in the year. And the average for an execution process is 3.5 years, but in many cases is far longer the process. This bureaucratic approach, this difficulty to arrive to concrete eviction in our country seems the main homeland prevention system in Italy. So as often happens in Italy, we don't have sure rights, clear rights. We don't have a strong policy framework. We have adaptations at local level where people like judges in that case or officers or public officers in social services try with using the legislation and bureaucracy to participate, sort of procrastination attitude, hoping that something will happen in the future. So procrastination probably and long terms long fact terms in this field are one of the main policy for homeless prevention we have in that case. Federcasa in 2020 estimate that if 300,000 more social houses were available at 200 or 110 euros per month on average, probably from the present 1 million poor people suffering housing exclusion in Italy, we will move to 300,000. So this is a huge leverage we have at disposal for facing poverty in general and housing exclusion, and for facing homelessness too. What can I say about housing policies is that after the Ina Casa housing plan going around from 1949 to 1963, probably we don't have the general frame in social policy, in housing policy, sorry. So without a general frame, we can use just a local frame or informal frames. There are public funds for supporting, for rental support, and in that year and in 2020, that frame was implemented and shared a lot of money with the municipalities, but it's an emergency frame, and it depends from the orientation of the different government. The National Fund for supporting for rental support has been funded with sometimes 10 million, sometimes 200 million, sometimes zero. You can change year by year. Otherwise, you can say you have a policy frame. You say you have measure. You have temporary measure. We have a lot of temporary measures. We have not real frames. It's for me very relevant the fact that in the more than 450 projects that up to now Italian government received from public agency for the use of recovery fund after the COVID, that in next spring probably will be submitted from Italy to the European Union. No one is about social and affordable housing. There are requests for over 70 billion euros, but no one proposed in the public institution, government agency, ministries, welfare institution, welfare national institution, cities, municipalities. No one proposed to the government, even if allowed, a scheme for infrastructural investment in social and affordable housing. And this is a very cultural scene of what I'm trying to say to you. So for concluding, here are some recommendations I think are necessary for implementing a real housing policy frame in our country. I think government, regions, municipalities and public agencies for social housing should cooperate more and more, considering affordable housing as a structural part of the local and the national welfare model. Specialists of welfare field now just sometimes consider housing market as a partner in their strategies. Housing market is central in a welfare local strategies and at national level. Then I think then social affordable housing should be a priority in the infrastructural strategy of the country for the next 10 years at least. And that we have to rebalance monetary transfer and local services in the public social expenditure, so to re-equilibrate the welfare Italian model, considering more and more housing cost and the value that there is in providing affordable housing to people in need. Municipalities all around the country should be sensitized about giving permanent addresses to people, and Stefano will talk about this after me, and strongly cooperate with private sector, especially cooperative non-profit sector, in promoting and organizing social housing projects and frameworks at community level, where, as I said before, some interesting experiences ongoing. I think we can use several funds, the European recovery funds, first of all, and we have also to ease the constraint that we have now in the rental market for making the rental paying for all the parts involved in this market. So owner, tenants, and public institutions, social services, we have to find some more efficient model, not waiting the long times of jurisdiction, but trying to negotiate on a more clear and effective framework. So sorry for being so long. Thank you very much. Hope the overview could be useful for you, and I'm sure that other panelists will explain you more clearly than me what is ongoing really in Italy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paolo. Okay, I leave the floor to Giulia.
Thank you. Thank you, Paolo and Max and Maria also for your presentation. I introduce myself. My name is Giulia Gallizioli, and I'm a volunteer of Avvocato di Strada, which is an Italian organization. I'll just take 2 minutes to introduce the next two panelists, Stefano Turi and Camilla Zamparini. They are both lawyers, and they are volunteers as well of Avvocato di Strada. Just one word about Avvocato di Strada. It is an organization of volunteers, including lawyers, but also law students and other citizens, which was established with the purpose of providing free legal aid to homeless people. So it was born in 2001, and since now we have volunteers all around Italy that are mainly lawyers and that provide free legal aid to homeless people. So the things that we are talking about today are very interesting also for our work as lawyers. Having said that, I will just let Stefano and Camilla talk. Stefano will talk us about residence, which is an important fight for Avvocato di Strada. And then after him, Camilla will talk about some innovative mechanisms to prevent eviction, in particular the case of the city of Bologna. So thank you, and I let Stefano talk.
You're muted. You're muted, Stefano.
Sorry. It's okay. I'm Stefano, and I'm so happy to be here with you. And so got to the start. Can I have help? Can I have help with the
Share the screen?
share the screen? Yeah.
Yes, when you open share the screen, you can see different windows of your computer.
That's good. Okay.
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 Your desk. Okay, the layout.
Thank you.
Perfect.
It's okay.
Okay. Yes, we can see.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Grateful. Implication of residence of homeless people for housing rights. This is the argument. So let's start with the ordinary and not ordinary law governing residence. There are some law, like the Article 43 of the Civil Code. The notation of residence coincide with the place of habitual residence. There is also the law number 100/2028 from 1954, and the resident population registry must be kept in each municipality. Also the position relating to homeless people who have established their domicile. So there is the decree of President of Republic number 2023 from 1989. Said the person who doesn't have a fixed address is considered to the resident in the municipality of his domicile, and in absence of this, the municipality of birth. The circular by Istat number 2097 from 1992, if the homeless person doesn't have an address of a real domicile in the municipality, the registry office must establish the fictitious street, territorially not existent, but equivalent in the legal value. So this is the situation in Italy. There isn't one law about the residence, but there are a lot of law, and ordinary and not ordinary, and it means there are a much of chaos about the residence, because there are in the time there are also decree of Minister of Intern, like Decreto Sicurezza, Decreto Casa, etc., that have complicated this situation. Why the residence is important? Because the residence is the key to access the constitutional rights. The residence status is important because it's prodromal to access to a set of rights, especially those constitutionality guaranteed. Who is the right to work, Article 4 of the Constitution, right to health, Article 32 of the Constitution, right to vote, Article 48, right to social services, Article 38, right to defense, Article 24. Residence means access to the public buildings and the social housing, have the possibility to sign a legally valid contract for work, rent a house, open a current account, have the possibility to receive the notification by mail, have the possibility to cover it in hospital or be defended by a lawyer. But we must do important classification. The purpose of the registering with the registry office, the law number 1228, is in the interest.
Excuse me, Stefano.
Yeah?
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Can you shift the slide, please?
Okay.
Because we can
Sorry.
see the first slide. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Invest in the interest of the homeless person to promote the connection with the territory. In the interest of the state, the registration of all the population permanently present in the territory. In the time, the jurisprudence has therefore identified two fundamental elements of the concept of residence. The first one, an objective element, that is the physical place where a person is. The second, a subjective element, that is the will of the subject to reside in the place. The result of this concept is a fictitious residence for protect everybody and don't and have one type of citizen of Italian Republic. What about the territorial practice? From the Italian regulatory context, which has been complicated by multiple ministerial decrees, not least the format security decree, and the fact that to date there isn't a residence law. With time, local territories have development heterogeneous practices, more or less distance from aforementioned source of law in order on ensure the services offered by registry's office. Let's take into consideration two examples, understand and analyze how local territories have reacted. The experience, the tourist experience, like the practice closer to the law, the Milan experience with the innovative practice and more distant from the normative. So what about the tourist experience? The municipality of Turin allows the homeless person to submit a request directed to register office to obtain the fictitious street. To date, the Ministry of Internal Affairs has not prepared an official from that, take into account to particular case of homeless, but the procedure is as follows. The registry form, duly complete in its entirety and with the necessary documentation attached, must be assigned by the application and presented in one of following ways. At the counter, together with the ID card for the applicant, electronically, email, or fax, together with a copy of the ID card of the applicant, by post together with a copy of the ID card of applicant. Within 2 days of receiving the aforementioned declaration by the applicant, the registry officer will assess whether it is complete and unmissable, and if so, she will proceed with the registration and the start of the preliminary phase. If not, she will send a notice of inadmissibility to the interested part, indicating the missing elements. The registration process has a duration of 45 days from the date when the declaration has been submitted. In the event, then, reason that prevent the acceptance of the registration request should arise during the preliminary phase. The registry office will send the interested part a notice of the rejection, inviting him or her to produce document and or necessary information to avoid the negative conclusion of the registration process. The Milan experience. The municipality of Milan recognized that any homeless person who submits a request and has the right to can be registered at the registry office according to the procedures established by law. Experimenting with a city model as uniform as possible and extending to the territories within the city's municipality. Special multidisciplinary help desks have also been created to support and guide during the registration process. This is aimed at homeless people for any age, nationality, ethnic background, religion, etc. People who document through a report by third, second entity in charge of individual path of the beneficiary of the service. The existence of an ongoing relationship with the territory in terms of interest, relationships, and affections. People who express the will and intention to remain the municipality of Milan. What about the problem of this? Why it is necessary for a homeless person going through a mediation of social service to obtain the registered residence? The law doesn't provide for it, but it is also true that it doesn't expressly provide it. Opportunity. Mediating request from the registered residents through help desks managed by education staff allows through bureaucratic practice social problem to emerge and to guide the citizen to services. Conclusion. In these pandemic times, we have asked ourselves some questions. The first one, how to stay at home if I don't have a home? How can I protect my health if I don't have home? In the fixed residence, is the fixed residence the best that we can do for the homeless? Are the dormitories really the best structure in this time? So, like Socrates said, I know, I don't know. I think the way to work is the housing first approach. A home and the possibility to have a real residence in it. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefano.
Thank you too.
Camilla?
Buongiorno, I hope everybody is still there. Good morning. And I hope you still have little patience to listen to the last contribution that we offered this morning. My name is Camilla Zamparini, and I'm trying to share my screen with you so that you can see slides, and let me know if you can see them, if you can see what I see. Any reaction?
Not
Now
yet.
No.
No?
No.
Share screen. Share.
Okay. Yes.
Okay. So maybe this is better, maybe?
Fantastic.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry, it's my first time ever to share screen, so I'm trying to do my best. So, good morning. The case of Bologna is a little experience in Italy that I'm sure it could be copied and implemented if any other county or municipality would try. And our main intervention is the creation of a permanent memorandum of understanding to prevent evictions. So the idea is prevention, as the previous panelist said in the earlier this morning, because once you have lost your house, the situation is completely different, and the frame people are forced to move into is much more difficult. We are going to see a few examples at the end of my contribution from our desk of Sportello di Strada, Bologna. So we'll talk a bit of that later. But let's stick to this for the moment. So we have a permanent memorandum of understanding since 2011, signed by Prefecture of Bologna, so government, the local government, the local side of the central government, better, the region, the province and the municipalities. And then we have the Bar Association, trade unions, associations for landlords and tenants, and credit institutions and banking foundations. So you see, we have different levels of society, public and private, so that we can try to take the best from each of them. The idea of the memorandum, so the main targets are to give access to a contribution to balance the arrears, meaning the not paid rent, in order to avoid the validation of eviction, or if there is an eviction validation but not yet carried out, to give contribution for the payment of 2/3 of the deposit of a new accommodation. So I hope you can see the difference. The idea is to intervene in two different moments that are very critical ones. The first case is the contribution in order to avoid the validation of eviction, meaning you stay where you are in the house you are living in, or if you are given already a validation, but has not been carried out. So the law says you are due to leave, but this has not happened yet. So the contribution is for the payment of part, 2/3 of the deposit of a new accommodation, so that there will be a shift from one house to the other, not to stay homeless or become homeless. The contribution covers 100% of the not paid rent until a maximum of 8,000 euros in high density counties, or half of it in other counties. These are the actual fares, the actual amount of money that this memorandum is liable to give. The measure can also cover up to 12,000 euros if the existing contract lasts for more than 2 years. So meaning we are doing our best so that you can stay in the house for a reasonable lapse of time, at last 2 more years, or if eviction has already been declared, to pay rates and deposit for the new contract. The mechanism, as you can understand, is organized, as I said, to county level, to regional level, with the collaboration and contribution of private and public. Talking about private and public contribution, we have the social housing system in Bologna called ACER, that is not only in Bologna, of course, that has blocked the eviction protocol until end of the, 2020, the current year. This happens quite frequently, I have to say, so it's not a pandemic measure, it's not a COVID era measure, it's something that has been done through years in order to help tenants to stay and having granted an access to funds. So, as you can read, the protocol provides for defaulting, meaning without malice, tenants in possession of certain requirements access to a dedicated fund that allows them to avoid eviction by providing contribution. These are extraordinary intervention measures to reduce housing problems in support of families affected by the request of eviction. So the two instruments, the two tools together, the Memorandum of Understanding that we have talked about and the social housing system in Bologna are, in my view, good examples of collaboration between private and public. Of course, there are, some limits to this. We have a field to grant, to admit all these benefits. And if for Italian audience, if you are curious to see it, we can attach it to the chat later on and see all the requirements, what they are, what they ask, and the specific in depth. Let's say that generally speaking, and to give you a general overview, the idea is to have a link to the territory. So to have a residence for at least 1 year in the accommodation located in Bologna. So the idea is that these tools can be used by people that are have a link, have a connection with the territory they live, and so the grant with the benefits they are asking. The family income must not be high, so not exceeding a fork between 20,000 and 35,000 euros per year, meaning that there are different measures, way to measure the income. This is a very complicated system for Italians, so I'm afraid our foreigner guests will find this very complicated. But basically the idea is that we measure, let's say, the income from work and the possession of different other incomes, which is a ISE for the Italian guests, whereas ISE with a double E in the end is a measure that controls the first one according to the number of people living in the house and the number of, for example, underage or people with disabilities or elderly. So the first measure is connected with the income, and the second measure is connected with the subjective part of the family that is looking for the benefits. The total amount of the not paid rent, so overall arrears quantified at the date of the first hearing in court, must not be exceeding 10,000 euros. And then you have to explain your reasons, your objective and subjective reasons for your current economic difficulty. Let's say that in this specific time, courts in Bologna are trying to do their part in a positive way and are experimenting a new protocol online to avoid people assembling in the same chamber during eviction hearings. But what is probably more important for our meeting today is that courts in this protocol are strongly recommending to enter the memorandum of understanding or to enter a mediation phase before going to court. So courts are trying to avoid people, landlords and tenants, avoid them to come to court. And these two options shall be positively considered on both sides, landlords and tenants, as procedural good faith behavior. So this means that the judge, when he's faced with an eviction case, not only will recommend, but shall ask positively if people before him have submitted a mediation phase before going to court, or if they want to enter the memorandum of understanding that gives money, grants money, as we were saying. And this attitude, of course, cannot be an order from the court, but will be considered as good faith behavior in court, which is very important in order to, as for legal expenses as well. So the whole idea is from collaboration, social, public and private, from collaboration with the social housing scheme, and from courts collaboration. The idea is from all these issues, from all these partners in community, to grant a level of understanding and of, let's say, collaboration in factual terms that can keep people in the house. So I don't know if there are any questions about it. If not, I can move to the next part of my contribution, which is willing to give you an example of what of what is happening in our desk in Bologna, in Avvocato di Strada, which is, as you probably know, our street lawyer onlus. We offer free legal advice for homeless, and in this regard, we have witnessed several situations of people that are looking for help because they lost their house. So everything that have been said before could not be applied to them, or was not granted to them, or they didn't know they could have access to these forms of collaboration. Anyway, people that are living not in a house. So the first case I would like to share with you is what I called Mr. Coleman. Mr. Coleman is a man that was asked to leave the social housing scheme where he was accommodated because he had problems of cohabitation with other guests. So he was asked to leave the place. And so he came to us to ask for help. It was, of course, the best moment, so to say, because it was the end of February this year, and the pandemic crisis was going to be hitting us, as you know. So it was very complicated to find a place for him. At the same time, Mr. Coleman suffers from a very hard disease in pneumas. So it was very complicated to find a solution that could grant him shelter that could be safe also for his health situation. Anyway, there was a first solution in a dormitory. While in dormitory, we tried to understand real reasons why the social housing scheme he was granted before had failed. Because as we all know, cohabitation problems are everyday business, and it's not a real reason to, let's say, deny shelters to people in need. So we tried to renegotiate this hospitality, and in fact we managed to put him back in the same social housing scheme he had to leave, and at the moment he is hosted in a flat where he pays a very, very little indemnity, waiting for a flat in the private rented sector. The social services offered to pay him the deposit in case he could find a flat to live or to share with other people, in this case that he would choose, so that could be more easy for all of them to cohabitate. Mr. Halfaman, that I called Halfaman, of course, instead turned to our desk because he had signed an immediate withdrawal to the owner of the contract he had submitted earlier on, after a riot with the owner. The owner called the police, and Mr. Alphaman found himself in a situation where he had to sign this immediate withdrawal. Of course, after signing it, he immediately realized that he had made a big mistake, because he had nowhere else to live. He had nowhere else to leave his personal belongings, and his only the only reason why I had signed was to let the police go, and let's say because he was afraid not to be able to pay the rent anymore because he had been fired. He came to our desk, and let's say, put him in contact to the social services, who helped him straight away to pay the rent. And at the same time, he entered, let's say, a sort of a therapy to strengthen his mental faculties and to strengthen his willingness to find a new job and to create new conditions for him to go on in his life, staying in the flat that he didn't want to leave at that stage. So we tried to mediate, to negotiate with the social services and the owner of the flat, offering our help to organize a spontaneous release once he had found another housing solution. During this period, social services are helping him with the rent and are trying to find him a new job, of course. We have actually in Italy, we have benefits granted from the central government to people that are in need and lost their job. So he's also using the so-called reddito di cittadinanza to pay the rent, together with the help given by the social services. And the last case is, and I'll be very quick, is Mrs. West. Mrs. West is a woman that was married with an Italian man, and they were both hosted in a social house by a third person. They were paying, let's say, a rent that was not official, being hosted by a tenant of a social house. She simply decided to go and visit her parents in Tunisia. And once she was back, after 3 weeks, she found the door of the house completely walled, meaning with bricks. The house had been walled, completely locked, with all her stuff and her personal belongings and her furniture walled in the house. What happened was, as we found out, that the tenants had decided to leave the house, but didn't tell the couple. So one morning, this house has been blocked by the social housing system, and a wall was created, it was made on the door of the house. The husband took the opportunity of this and left the wife, not telling her what was going on, and probably thinking or hoping that she would go back to Tunisia once she found what was going on in Bologna. She instead decided to stay, and we are talking of a woman that has a double citizenship. She's in Italy since 18 years ago, so she's in all respect an Italian citizen. And she decided to stay, and she is now helped by the social service, and we are trying to give our legal help in order to find a way to separate her, possibly in a, let's say, concilious, in a consensus way from the husband. Of course, she has no money, and she lives with the neighbors. the neighbors of the social house she used to live in offered her their friendship and their help. And so she's spending 2 weeks to one neighbor, 2 weeks to a different neighbor, 2 weeks to a third neighbor, waiting for a new shelter for her and possibly for justice. So this is the end of my contribution. I hope you are still there, and I hope you understood and enjoyed the speech and the overall speech. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Caterina.
Yes, Maria, we have finished the second part of the webinar, and I don't know if there are questions in the chat.
I have seen.
I think a lot of participants are leaving because, okay, should leave. Okay, also Paolo, yes.
But maybe we can read aloud. I think it's very interesting, some of the comments that have been made. Maybe I can do them if you want, like just to I think it's interesting, for example, to highlight what Cesare Ottolini has been sharing with us. So I think his first reactions were for the Paolo's presentation. So he thinks that the legal and activist level is very relevant, and that the structural solution is public rent control and a strong development of public housing. And also he was mentioning the idea that now there's a recovery fund for public housing. And he was trying to, I think the first question was exactly about FEDERCASA. And I don't know if Paolo is still there and he would like to say something about that. Is he still there? Or
oh, yes, just very quickly, because I have to leave because we have another meeting starting in a minute.
No
I think Cesare is right, because FEDERCASA could play today a strong role in proposing to the government solutions. I think in the government there's no culture enough to cope with the real problem of social housing. And I think edilizia residenziale pubblica is the way in which we can today, sorry for video, is the way in which we can today configuration the Italian model a real social housing frame. Together with the private model, in parallel with this, but this is the focus. Edilizia residenziale pubblica is the focus, and control on the rental market is a sort of, I can say, byproduct, not in itself, because it's very important and need norms and need attention and need negotiation with property and so on, but because we have to cope with real needs in the short term, and to cope with real needs in the short terms, we can put on the stop on the evictions for sometimes more, but in this time we have to make available a biggest part of public houses, and we have the possibility, because we have seen that there is 20% of the buildings that are not usable now. We can make it usable with in structural funds and investment, and we can also extend without building other construction, but restructuring the available one or the not finished one. There is a lot of houses not finished in the private market that can be used at this sense. Is a way to use the Article 47 Constitution and the idea of social function of property, and so there's room for quick intervention. We need a stronger and broader alliance among different subjects to reach this goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paolo. Mike, you need to go. Caterina, can I continue? Or would you like to continue yourself?
No, I have no comments. Okay, Paolo says, I think we need to promote housing policies in Italy because there is a really gap in the national framework, and every regulation is based on territorial contracts and accord between tenants and owners. And we have a polarized housing market, and this means a lot of people has the property housing, and it is a power for a lot of them, and a lot of people have not house. And I think the FEOPS is ready to promote an alliance with other stakeholders, of course, because usually we work with the Ministry of Social Affairs and Labor, but we think that's very important to open cooperation and advocacy action, strongly advocacy action with the Ministry of Housing and Infrastructure in Italy. Mm-hmm. And the two directions I think we have in front of us. Prevent eviction, and because that means prevent homelessness, and to promote rental control. Mm-hmm. And I think the case of Berlin is very interesting for us. We have a different, of course, normative framework, but I think for us is very inspiring.
Mm-hmm. About I think there was also an interest in everything to do with the extension of evictions. From FEANTSA and Housing Rights Watch, we've been monitoring the situation, and I think in most countries in Europe, the extension of evictions has expired or will expire soon. I don't know how big of a problem this is in Italy, but we are worried that this will be like a problem. I understand that the Bologna, the project or the good practice that Camilla was explaining, it's as one very strong solution to that, and I think that strengthening the coordination and the cooperation among the different actors is a key issue. So because even if we promote the extension of evictions, there's always who is going to pay for the rental arrears, or because they are accumulating during this COVID time. So we think that extension of eviction by itself is not a real solution, because it just postpones the problem. But I am not sure if does anybody of you want to speak a bit about how big the problem of eviction is or will be in Italy? And I don't know. I'm looking to. I would like to look at from the activist perspective, but also from the legal perspective. You know, like and I think what Camilla Zamparini was telling us is really, really relevant. I don't know. Was it the situation in the rest of the country? Maybe, I don't know. Or how are you looking at that in the global of Italy?
If I can give a comment to this, we are trying to, as I tried to explain, to implement the collaboration between, let's say, the public and the private, and the social and the foundations and the credit institutions. But one thing will never change if the main frame does not change, and is the lack of money from one side, and the recovery fund might be of help in this situation. Because of course, more money you put into these models, more families can be helped and granted solutions. And on the other side, what I personally believe is that we have to find proactive solutions with landlords, because I understand is not exactly the right panel this today, but we have to find an agreement with landlords. There is no, in my view, this is a personal view, but I believe this, we cannot ask landlords only to wait for their house if they need to have it back, or we cannot ask them, we cannot give money to, let's say, to silence them. On their side, there is a right to have the house back. So in order to, we cannot hide this, which is, in my view, the major problem. We have to find a way to talk with the landlords associations and find solutions there. On the other side, we have to build more social housing. Building more social housing could be a proactive solution to major evictions. So I think that it's not only a question of dealing with what is actually present, which is always said to prevent evictions in the state of reality we live in, but we should also do the following step. We should move from where we are and trying to create more conditions to have more availability of houses from the public, from the social housing, physically building the new houses, and on the other side, find different ways to tackle with the landlords associations. That cannot only be, we give you money so that you can keep the tenants in, cannot be only this solution. This is a personal opinion. This can help. Thank you.
I would like just to mention something I didn't have time to say in my presentation, and maybe this is relevant for you, or I don't know. I think actually, what's his name? Cesare? I don't know how to pronounce this. Cesare? About how the platform of evictions in Spain is using the UN system to stop evictions, to like kind of interim measures. So one of the things that I didn't want into too much detail because it's complicated is that the Spanish NGOs were using the optional protocol to, in a few cases, they managed to stop the eviction because there was no alternative accommodation for the people that were going to be evicted from their homes. So there are like, I don't know, maybe more than 100, I think, or around 100 cases right now in the Committee of Economic and Social and Cultural Rights. But all lawyers that I spoke about say that despite sometimes the decisions of the Committee of Economic and Social Rights managed to even change the law, including this no eviction without an alternative accommodation. But the problem in Spain is exactly the same as in Italy. Like only 1.3%, I think, of social housing, and the rest is private. So in a situation of eviction, social services are not able to offer an alternative accommodation because of lack of social housing. So in this way, I think what you just said, Camila, it makes sense. Like if social services cannot offer an alternative accommodation because they don't have enough social housing, well, even if we use the law and the international UN system, in the end, what we need is housing. So, and paying for a room and a hostel, which has been like a temporary solution, but it cannot be a long-term solution, if you know what I mean. So I don't know if this is helps you in the and I think I don't have anything else to say, and I don't think there are many other big questions, but maybe Caterina, Julia, Camila, would you like to say a last word before we close the webinar? Are you tired? Well, at least it's a Friday tired. And you have the weekend in front of you.
No. Don't worry, Maria. Thank you, because I think it's very useful for us, for Italian people and participants. And thanks to panelists, Camilla, Stefano, and Paolo, and Max. And I hope it is the start point to cooperate for other action together with you and Housing Rights Watch. And also I leave my email address to Cesare and Laura, very reactive participants today. Thank you. And so on.
Thank you so much again. I mean, this is my turn to say thank you to all of you for really interesting presentations, for taking the time to prepare and be here today. So fortunately, this webinar is being recorded, so maybe more people will have a chance to listen to our discussions, and yeah, and I hope that in the future we'll be able to go a step beyond, and this was a kind of first step, and maybe we can find other learning needs for Italian members that maybe my idea after the webinar is to send evaluation to all of you. So if you want to tell us about how you thought, or what's your opinion about the webinar, or what kind of other contents you think it could be interesting in your cases, well, I am more than open to listen to them and try to organize similar events. And hopefully one day we will be able to see each other in person, because these kind of events are much nicer if I can give you a big hug. But well, right now we were hoping that we were going to be in a better place at the end of October, but on the contrary, we've gone backwards, and I think this is the case for most of Europe. So anyway, thank you very much for being here. Thank you, Caterina, for your efforts, and FIOPS and Avvocato di Strada for always being there every time that we do something together. And well, have a lovely weekend, you all. Thank you to all the attendees. And bye-bye. So I'm
enjoy.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye, Stefano. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, Max.
Bye, Max.